Hello, everyone. Well, now you may think another woman on stage talking about diversity. I'm Stefanie Peters, the founder and CEO of enable2grow, and I will talk to you about diversity, but I want to redefine diversity for you and show you the business impact, what it really means. This is why diversity really matters. Let's make this interactive. You just had lunch, so let's wake a little bit up. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you think. Is this diversity? A man and a woman. Show me your hands. Is diversity? Yes? No? How about these three guys? Diverse? Are they diverse? What do you think? And now these. What do you think? Now, diverse? Now we have three ladies. Are they diverse now? Is this diversity what you see? Or maybe now, if we add the occupation, is it becoming more diverse? Add the family situation. Diverse? These two guys, are they diverse? We don't know. But now, adding their ethnicity, knowing they come from different backgrounds, speaking different languages. My point is, diversity is much more than just the visible elements of diversity we all know, like gender, like culture, like skin color. It's much more, like religion and so on. It really has different components and different dimensions. You know all these, but let's add another whole dimension of it. There's the dimension of education, of parenthood, of income, of family. You see the point? I see there is so much more to say about diversity than just the visible parts of it. And then, of course, the organization. You also are diverse defined by your function, your workplace. You get the point, but let me make this a little bit clearer with the example and showcase of my company. This is enable2grow, my team. And as you can see, we are a diverse team. You can already see it. But much more important, we really are diverse from our backgrounds, from what you cannot see, and this is how we provide value to our clients. We became diverse very naturally. I just followed the vision of becoming the growth consulting firm of the future, and this is how it naturally became a network of 60+ enablers and experts working as dispersed and virtual teams across Europe. But let me give you an example what I really mean by diversity. This is our senior market researcher. She is a PhD in mechanical engineering. She worked for McKinsey. She has 5 children, and she has by far the highest fitness of all of us. This is a serial entrepreneur. He founded his first tech company, Intershop, 15 years ago. Since then, he founded 9 more. He's never worked in a consulting firm, and our clients love him for his very candid and open opinion. He has lived in Thailand, he is married to an Ukrainian, and so on. And here is my UK business partner. She grew up in the UK in a Sikh community. She studied in Canada and Switzerland and worked there. She worked in Munich for Siemens, and now she's co-founded startups. That's what I mean by diversity, and that's what we as enable2grow live. And this is what you may very well know, I think. Who of you has seen this concept of diversified portfolio? Mitigating risk by having a diversified assets and not putting all your eggs in one basket. I think everybody has heard that before. But it's important from my perspective to apply this concept to the workforce. This is what I mean by diversification. A diversified workforce has the same advantages and the same benefits. You mitigate risk, you reduce the risk, you have workforce coming from emerging markets, you have less risk with dealing with war of talent if you're more open to diverse people. And that brings you a healthy future and much more growth. Now let's look at some numbers. Well, here's the downside. Numbers for diversity are difficult, and those who have it often make them up. So there is no point in coming up with some diversity KPIs that you can hardly measure. The point is we feel diversity, we feel the impact of it. On the other hand, just focusing on diversity without having a profitable business also doesn't work. So let's make sure we focus on having a profitable business and being diverse at the same time. Here are a few stats that we found. Gender diverse companies have a much higher financial performance. Ethnically diverse companies have an even higher financial performance. These are studies by McKinsey. And you see the difference of 18 and 25%. This really makes an impact the more diverse you are. And these are only the simple dimensions of gender and ethnicality. The average ROE is 15% with companies having no women in top management versus 22 in the companies where there are women. And that's the difference, and that's the impact I mean. And it's only talking about gender. There are so many more components to diversity. 41% of average ROE difference and 56% of average EBIT margin, I think that should speak to you and that should make the difference. Now, so many companies are in this already, thank God, have understood the business impact of diversity. Law firms, accountants, even the police force is into it. And one of the leaders, for me, is Silicon Valley Bank. They have an excellent track record in diversity. And this is why I would now like to bring on stage Phil Cox. I'm very, very honored that we really have a true ambassador of diversity here. Please come on stage.
Thank you very much.
Phil is the head of EMEA of Silicon Valley Bank. He is the president of Silicon Valley Bank UK, and he's also a member of the executive management team. He's been for more than 10 years with Silicon Valley Bank and can speak of quite a track record, what you already have done. So thank you very much for joining us here. Maybe I gave now my definition of diversity, but what is diversity from your perspective?
Yeah, well, we've started to focus on it a lot more in recent years, more consciously. I think the DNA of the organization made the unconscious efforts in the early days positive, but as we started to think about it, I think we talk of it as broadly as possible in the sense of valuing difference.
Yep.
And that could be by so many different dimensions, but obviously our base is in Northern California. It's a very diverse population, and I think as an employer there, our statistics should match, roughly that kind of base as well. And that's true as we've gone internationally and opened up our offices around the world, that we've kind of been able to give that some thought ahead of time as we've built our businesses.
Correct. As a woman, I cannot avoid diversity, but what is your perspective, from a male perspective, throughout your career with diversity and its impact?
Well, I guess one of the things is that when you really sit down and think about this at home, you think, why would I want anyone to treat me differently from anybody else? Yep. And I think you have to understand that every individual kind of on the planet feels like that at heart. And so, from my point of view, always thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of the individuals that you have in your company, your client base, your partners that you engaged with, that everyone is going to feel that way. Why wouldn't I not be treated equally and in the same way as everybody else? And I think that's a great starting point to look at this particular issue.
Absolutely. And from a business perspective, I mean, my business is focused on Europe very much. You have the global perspective. Silicon Valley Bank is truly global, and you also really want that wherever you just launched in Germany, for example, you really want that your clients feel in their home. So you make a big effort of not being the same in every country. What does that bring you as an impact, a measurable business impact?
Well, I think when we first started to move outside of Northern California, we didn't get it right initially, because the bank was very, very proud of its culture and used language like, does this candidate fit? And does this fit with our culture? And that word was actually really negative. And as we started to appreciate the different cultures of New York versus San Francisco, then to London, to Tel Aviv and so on, how actually we wanted to be bound by values, and that the culture would be nuanced for different geographies as well. And we absolutely ruled out the word fit. and it was kind of coming together and aligning on a set of values, but understanding that our culture would be slightly different in different locations, based on the people that we pulled together. And I think if you let a little bit of that freedom reign in the way that you think about things, then you're not kind of boxing yourself into trying to look at all of your locations and your different business units with this one lens that you would otherwise do.
Very good. And I know, I mean, Silicon Valley Bank already has started very early on from our perspective with lots of initiatives of diversity. You've really lived it. You not only talked about it, you've walked the talk about diversity. What were the key initiatives where you really felt they made an impact?
I think the hardest hitting thing that we did about 5 years ago is we did some work on unconscious bias. And I think even those people who thought it's not a big deal, or I'm very aware of diversity related matters, I think when they saw some of that material and watched some of those videos, I think it really struck them about what really happens in business. And I'll give you a kind of an example of something that we then looked at. We worked with one of our clients actually to look at the way we were advertising our jobs externally outside the company, and the language we were using in those advertisements about the roles, the culture of the company, and so on. And you know, using things like hitting ROI, or kind of aggressive sales targets, or you know, the need for a lot of flexible and commitment to hours, and you know, listing things as must-haves, and kind of, you know, when you really think about people reading that, we were already massively narrowing down the audience that we might be talking to through those things. And I think working with experts around the language that you use about, because hitting ROI is probably building and developing relationships, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, and it's about learning and teaching and collaborating, and we massively changed the language you were using, because I think as you want to change, organize, and be even better over time, you've got to attract different people. And so working on a diverse pool of candidates so that you can pick the best candidate, even if that is a candidate that's not diverse to the group that you're hiring into, because you, at the end of the day, you want the best candidate, but working very hard to create the pool in the first place that has diversity. There was an example of something that we had to do. That
makes complete sense, and definitely is important. From my perspective, what is also important, and we talked about this earlier, was it's not only about recruiting diverse people, it's about including diverse people. So how do you make sure I have a team in Europe, pretty dispersed, you know, how do you include them? How do they feel part of the culture? And maybe you can give this as a final big advice, as a key takeaway also for the audience to take along, how to make a difference with diversity.
Well, the one thing we got right at the beginning of this work was that we did set up a very senior group at the bank, and we called it diversity and inclusion. But of course, then we spent 99% of our time talking about diversity and measurements, and could we shift from X to Y in different dynamics. And we quickly got really frustrated with that, because that is a long-term plan about shifting from a certain set of statistics to a desired set of statistics, and you quickly move to, it's really about inclusion, and it's about every individual that we employ, and we have about 3,000 employees around the world, feeling that they can bring their kind of best self to the organization. And so, you know, for me, there is no bigger rule in all of this than, in order for you to really genuinely get that feel inside your company, the people at the very top of the company have to genuinely believe that having a more diverse workforce is actually a good thing. And it has to be a critical success factor for the organization in the long run. Because if they don't believe it, then it becomes about those statistics on the diversity side, as opposed to a genuine engagement with your employee base.
Absolutely, I can fully underline this. Full commitment, walk the talk from the top is key. And another thing I learned today, you need to have excellent diversity ambassadors like Phil on stage to really make a difference and get these insights directly from here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.